Good afternoon. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. While folks are joining, if you could send a note in the question box to let me know that you can hear me and see the title slide, that would be great. And again, we'll start in about 2 minutes. All right, great. It looks like folks can hear me and see my slides, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Subgrantee Post-Award webinar for the FY23 SOAR Act Formula Combined Consolidated Grant. My name is Brianna Griffin, and I'm the Manager of Federal Programs and Strategic Funding here at OSSI, and our team oversees and administers the SOAR Act grants. So by the end of this training, this webinar, we hope that you will understand the expectations and requirements of the FY23 SOAR Act Formula Combined Consolidated Grant, including the purpose of those funds, reimbursement request submission, maintaining the central data application, semi-annual narrative reporting requirements, and knowing how to make changes to your project budget if necessary. All right, so the purpose of funds, the SOAR formula grants are, there are 2 of them, the academic quality and early childhood grants, and each have a distinct purpose. The purpose or projects that receive funding for academic quality will be designed to have a direct impact on student achievement, either school-wide or for specific subgroups of students. And then the early childhood grants support supplementary activities that support school readiness, including the development of literacy and mathematics skills for early childhood students. And if you have any questions about the specific purposes of these grants or how your application that was approved aligns to these purposes, please feel free to reach out to your SOAR contact. All right, so moving on quickly to the reimbursement process. So for both grants, the award period began on July 1st of last year and will end on September 30th of this year. So there will not be an ability to carry over funds into FY24. So please be aware of that as you're working to draw down your full allocation during this fiscal year. And also, just as a reminder, reimbursements can go back to costs that were obligated as early as July 1st of last year. All OSSI grant funds are paid on a reimbursement basis, including the SOAR Act grants. Subgrantees must submit a detailed expenditure summary or reimbursement request through EGMS. And one thing to note about that reimbursement request is that while supporting documentation for all costs is not required, it is required for professional services. So anything budgeted under the professional services tab of your budget, and that would be contracted work. The required documentation would include proof of receipt of the good or service, which is typically in the form of an invoice, and then proof of payment. So that could be check or ACH confirmation or some other specific proof of payment. OSSI will review expenditures for allowability to ensure that they align with the application budget and that they are necessary, reasonable, and allocable. And I've linked to the definitions of reasonable and allocable on this slide. So you will receive the slides after this presentation and can follow the links to the applicable regulations that define those terms. But in general, necessary, meaning it's required in order to perform the activities under the grant. Reasonable, meaning it would be, the cost would be paid by a prudent person. And some considerations in determining reasonableness include whether you have followed your policies and procedures for incurring that cost, whether market prices have been considered, So those are some things that we or you should be taking into account when determining reasonableness of an expenditure. And then allocable, meaning it's charged to the grant in accordance with the relative or proportional benefit to the grant program. Subgrantees may submit amendments for shifts in the budget that do not alter the scope or objectives of the original project. So that is something we will be reviewing if you do submit a budget amendment, just ensuring that it's not changing the scope or objectives of your project. And then I've also linked here the Uniform Grants Guidance to CFR 200 and the Education Department General Administrative Regulations, or EDGAR, both of which apply to the SOAR Act grant as a federal Department of Education grant. Subgrantees will be reimbursed via ACH or direct deposit. LEAs will receive payment within 30 days of submitting an approvable reimbursement request. And all reimbursement requests for funds obligated during the entirety of the award period, so again, July 1st of last year through September 30th of this year, must be submitted by December 1st this year. And we will talk about that again later on. Subgrantees are strongly encouraged to submit reimbursements on a regular basis. So sometimes that will be on a monthly basis, quarterly, or even biweekly. A new policy that OSSI has in place for FY23 and beyond is that grantees must submit at least one reimbursement request per fiscal quarter in which funds were expended. So for the quarter of October 1st through December 31st, you would need to submit a reimbursement by January 31st. The only exception to that would be if there were no expenditures during that quarter, then you would not be required to submit a reimbursement by that deadline, and so forth. So for each quarter, you would need to submit a reimbursement by the end of the following month. And then please note that the final deadline to submit reimbursement requests for the entirety of the award period will be December 1st, 2023, as we mentioned before. The policy that states this information in more depth can be viewed by clicking the link on the bottom of this slide. One thing we wanted to call out for grantees is to know your SAM expiration date. So in order to receive payment, subgrantees must maintain an up-to-date 2023 central data application in EGMS. That central data application includes the System for Award Management, or SAM, Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI, that's issued by sam.gov, and it will also include the SAM expiration date. You'll want to build in plenty of time for this process. It might take up to 30 days from initial submission to process a reimbursement payment, and payment will not be processed if the SAM expiration date has passed. So be sure to review your SAM expiration date, have it on the calendar, and aim to submit reimbursements at least 45 days prior to that expiration date. Once you get within the 45 date range, there's always a chance that payments will be held up due to the SAM expiration date passing. So renewing your SAM and updating central data may take up to 20 days. So once you do get in within that 45 date range, you'll want to begin the process to renew your SAM registration and then update the central data application. During that time, you do not want to create any new reimbursement requests because they will just be either held up or rejected. If you need to update your SAM expiration date, you'll visit sam.gov to renew the registration. You should allow at least 10 business days in case of delays. And there is a ticket portal and a help desk. The information is here if you're having trouble renewing that registration. When you've received your updated registration, that's when you'll go into EGMS and amend the 2023 central data application to update the registration information, including the expiration date, and upload your new entity record. From there, that might take up to 10 business days. Usually it's much shorter for the central data application to be approved by OSSI. If you are in the process of working on a reimbursement request, and you're waiting for SAM your SAM approval, notify your SOAR grant manager so that they are aware when you've submitted that central data amendment and can help to move it along. Once the central data amendment is approved, delete any created reimbursement requests that were not submitted to OSSI, and then create a new request, which will automatically pull in the new SAM expiration date from central data. Common reimbursement issues. So we may reject a reimbursement request if the expenditures do not align with the most recently approved budget. So that could either be your original application budget, or if you've made any budget amendments, then that most recently approved amendment. Funds were obligated outside of the award period dates. Again, that award period is July 1st, 2022 through September 30th, 2023. If invoice and proof of payment is missing or incomplete for the professional services or equipment costs. Incomplete could mean that the date is missing, or the date maybe doesn't match the date inputted in the reimbursement request form itself. So just be sure to review all of the required documentation for professional services and equipment. Also, if the SAM expiration date has passed or is within the next 30 days, OSSI could reject that reimbursement in order to avoid payment being held up or not processed. And then expenditures don't appear necessary, reasonable, or allocable to the project. All right, so semi-annual reporting. So for LEAs that had ESSER 3 equivalent funding in FY22 and carried over that funding into FY23, you will be submitting additional narrative reports on that grant. So for the reporting period of October 1st through March 31st, you'll be submitting your third semi-annual narrative report, and the deadline will be May 15th, 2023. And then there will be a fourth semi-annual report as well as a final narrative report due in November. For all other LEAs, so these are LEAs that completed an FY23 SOAR Formula Combined Consolidated application for their FY23 allocation and did not complete an ESSER 3 continuation application. You'll be submitting the first semi-annual narrative report covering July 1st through March 31st by May 15th. And that reporting template is posted on the website. It has been released in the K-12 newsletter recently, and you can always reach out to your program contact, your SOAR grant manager if you have questions or can't find that reporting template. And then again, there will be a second semi-annual report and a final narrative report due in November. The reporting template is an opportunity for grantees to share progress updates and highlights from their project. This would include progress updates on the project activities listed in the approved performance measures template. That should actually say in the approved application, the project activities tab. Positive highlights of your program or project, the number of students, staff, and family members impacted by the project, and then academic outcomes impacted by the project and how they're being tracked. Grantees are not required to submit evidence of those project activities with each report. However, you should be maintaining that documentation, and it could be reviewed during a desktop or on-site monitoring review. Grantees that received academic quality and early childhood funding can complete one reporting template for both projects. If grantees carried over ESSER 3 equivalent funding from FY22, they must complete a separate reporting template for the ESSER 3 equivalent project. So there are two separate reporting templates, one for the FY23 SOAR formula grants and one for the FY22 ESSER 3 equivalent carryover. You'll email the completed reporting template or templates as a Word document or PDF to your OSSI grant manager by the stated deadline. So the next deadline for all grants is May 15th. And then for the final narrative report, you'll complete the final narrative section of the reporting template in addition to the regular semi-annual reporting section. All right, so budget amendments. This is a new process for FY23. Grantees may submit amendments in EGMS for shifts in the budget that do not alter the scope or objectives of the original project. Budget amendments must be submitted in EGMS and approved by OSCE. There is now a budget amendments tab in your application that should be directly next to the budget tab. So in addition to making the changes to the budget line items themselves in the budget tab, you'll also be completing the budget amendments tab to explain the rationale for each change. So that whether that's increasing a line, decreasing, adding, or removing line items. So this process will hopefully streamline things for grantees because it is replacing the former process of uploading a letter of rationale. Now the template for doing that rationale is actually built right into the application on the budget amendments tab. Budget amendments may be submitted retroactively, meaning after the expenditures have occurred. But the one constraint is that budget amendments may not be submitted after November 1st, 2023. So November 1st is the deadline for budget amendments for this fiscal year, and then December 1st is the final deadline for reimbursement requests. So keep those two dates after the end of the fiscal year kind of on the horizon. And an EGMS tip, you cannot have an open, meaning created or submitted but not approved reimbursement request and an open amendment in EGMS at the same time. So if you have an open amendment that hasn't been submitted, it will not allow you to create a reimbursement request and vice versa. All right, and then that is all of our content today. So I will take questions through the question box. And also I'm just putting contact information for our team here on the screen. At the bottom of this slide, there's a link to the allocations table, which has the program contact for each LEA listed, and then you can find their contact information here. With general questions about SOAR, you can always reach out to me. And for technical issues with the EGMS help desk, there is a email address and phone number, although you are also always welcome and encouraged to reach out to your SOAR program contact first, and they can also put in a help desk ticket on your behalf. All right, so if anyone has questions, feel free to put them into the question box in GoToWebinar, and I will try to address them. And again, this webinar has been recorded and the slides will be shared after, and they'll be posted on the website after this ends. Do not have any questions yet, so I will hang on the line for about 2 more minutes. If you do not have any questions, then feel free to hop off, and thank you for joining today. Have a good afternoon.